Sound checks. Thank you for colleagues coming in. Just before I call on Mr. McGuinty and Madame Marcoux, I just wanted to update members. There's been some developments with respect to our agenda. The first development with our agenda was that Mr. Justice Bastarash is willing to come before the committee. As of Friday, he was willing to come before the committee on the 7th. Now that date has been moved up to the 2nd of December. And I propose giving him the full 2-hour slot in order to be able to talk about that report on the RCMP. The second thing is I noticed while we were doing voting or QP, I'm not quite sure, that the fiscal update is scheduled for November 30th. That I will take guidance from colleagues as to whether we just cancel November 30th outright. Both developments will make some serious dents in our previously agreed upon agenda. So prior to Wednesday, I would appreciate the subcommittee communicating with me as to whether there are, as to how we want to proceed. Probably I'll reach out to each one of you and try to reorder the agenda so that we have a fully productive period of time from today through to the end of session. So with that, I'm going to welcome Mr. McGuinty and Madame Marcoux to the committee to present their report. I have to say, Mr. McGuinty, and given our long standing friendship and your superior knowledge of parliamentary procedures, I found this report utterly, well, I wouldn't say unintelligible, but I'm rather hoping that you can explain it to me, because I've given a couple of shots at trying to understand what was being recommended in this report. There's so many deletions and all in the report that it makes it very difficult to follow the narrative. So for the sake of the chair, Mr. McGuinty, I'm rather hoping you give the dummies version of your report. So, thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I'll do my very best to try to accommodate you and other colleagues. Good afternoon, colleagues. Thank you for allowing us to be here. We're very pleased to have this opportunity to discuss the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians' 2019 annual report and a separate special report, both tabled in Parliament on March 12th of this year. By way of background, the committee met 25 times between February and August of 2019. It heard from 48 senior officials from government and civil society, and it relied for this work on over 30,000 pages of classified information. Turning now to our first review, diversity and inclusion in the security and intelligence community. This first ever review provides a baseline of where the S&I community is in terms of diversity and inclusion for women, Aboriginal peoples, members of visible minorities, and persons with disabilities. Our review shows that the representation of these designated groups is lower than the overall Canadian public service, particularly members of visible minorities, and perhaps more troubling, rates of harassment and discrimination remain unacceptably high. Les dirigeants de ces organisations sont tous engagés à...
The directors of these organizations are all committed to improving diversity and inclusion among their respective staffs. However, sustained direction, general engagement, and greater responsibility throughout the security and intelligence community are essential to make sure that these organizations reflect and truly include the diversity of Canada. The committee recommended that there be an examination, a study in 3 to 5 years in order to evaluate progress. We also recommended improvement in the collection and analysis of data and the creation of a common set of measurements.
To the review examining the threat of foreign interference in Canada and the government response to that threat. The committee agreed to focus its efforts on traditional person-to-person foreign interference. We did not examine questions surrounding electoral integrity, did not review cyber threats and did not examine foreign acquisitions of Canadian business under the Investment Canada Act. The review concludes that there is significant and sustained foreign interference exercised by a number of foreign actors seeking to covertly and inappropriately interfere or exert influence in Canada. It also found that the government's response to this threat was done on a case-by-case, even ad hoc basis, and that our engagement with other levels of government and the Canadian public was limited. Par conséquent, le comité recommande au gouvernement.
Therefore, the committee recommends that the government support a strategy to counter foreign interference and to improve resilience. Our recommendation specifies in a rather detailed way what should be included in such a strategy, as presented in paragraph 297. The committee also recommends that the government support its strategy through a directive and sustained central coordination. Let's now go on to the third study in the annual report, the Canada Border Services Agency. The committee conducted the first independent study of national security and intelligence activities that are the most sensitive in the agency, including surveillance, the use of confidential human sources, and joint operations.
The committee found that CBSA's authorities are clear, well-governed, and supported by several statutes. However, CBSA does not have ministerial direction for its conduct of national security and intelligence activities. This constitutes a gap in ministerial accountability. The committee recommends that the Minister of Public Safety issue formal direction to CBSA consistent with the practice at CSIS and the RCMP. NSECOP also prepared a special report on the Department of National Defence and the Canadian Armed Forces. During a 2018 review of DND's defence intelligence activities, DND provided the committee with an internal directive that gives guidance to troops and employees on how to manage the collection of Canadian citizen information. This is known as the CANCIT Directive. Le comité a décidé de mener un examen spécial.
The committee decided to have a special examination of this directive to understand what legislation governed the collection, use, conservation, and dissemination of intelligence on Canadians by the department, and to evaluate the measure in which the application of this directive brought about risks, both legal and operational. The committee concluded that the CANCIT directive was not sufficiently clear and recommended that the department cooperate with the Privacy Commissioner to review all directives related to defense intelligence.
They formed an opinion that DND defense intelligence activities conducted as part of overseas operations may not be in compliance with the Privacy Act. The committee referred this matter as a result to the Attorney General pursuant to its obligation under Section 31.1 of the NSECOP Act, which reads as follows, Mr. Chair. The committee must inform the appropriate minister and the Attorney General of Canada of any activity that is carried out by a department and is related to national security and intelligence, and that, in the committee's opinion, may not be in compliance with the law. The committee also calls on the Minister of National Defence to ensure DND complies with the letter and spirit of the Privacy Act in all of its defence intelligence activities, whether they are conducted in Canada or abroad. In 2018, NSECOP recommended that the government give serious consideration to providing explicit legislative authority for the conduct of defense intelligence activities. In 2019, the committee goes further, calling on the Minister of National Defence to introduce legislation to govern defense intelligence activities. In response, the Ministers of National Defense and Public Safety have both been mandated to develop a framework governing defense intelligence. Thank you very much for your attention, colleagues. Those are my comments. I would say, Mr. Chair, if I could, if we're not able to answer detailed questions during this session, we would be pleased to provide written responses to you for the committee. I also want to note that this is a 182-page report, plus the special report on DND and the Canadian Armed Forces. We would welcome good comments, feedback, positive criticism on how we can do our work even better for the committee, for parliamentarians, and for Canadians. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. McGuinty. And indeed, my initial, I hope, constructive criticism was ameliorated somewhat by your timely intervention. So with that, I'm going to ask Mr. Kirk, Mr. Iachino, Madame Michaud, and Mr. Harris for 6 minutes each, starting with Mr. Kirk.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. McGuinty, for coming before the committee today. And certainly it's been enlightening as I have gone through the information that the reports that this committee has provided to Parliament, and the important work, I think, in ensuring that there is oversight in Canada's national security infrastructure. My first question is. There's been three areas that have been studied in regards to foreign interference. Sorry, you've omitted 3 areas in regards to studying foreign interference: election tampering, foreign investment reviews, and cyber threats, which I believe your committee will be delving into this year. That's my understanding. I'm wondering if NSECOP will be looking into the security of our elections and foreign investments in this in the upcoming studies you have planned.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Kurek, and Mr. Chair, through you to my colleague. A few things. The important thing I think to remember first off is that NSECOP is not so much an oversight committee as it is a review committee. In this, we differ from our American counterparts and are more in line with our other Five Eye partners, whether that's the ISC in the United Kingdom or the New Zealand model. It's a little different in Australia, but just to point out for listeners and viewers and for Mr. Kurek's benefit, that it's more a focus on review than it is oversight. The question of cyber threats is exactly what the committee is seized with now, Mr. Kurek, in this particular round of reviews. This cyber threat review is very considerable. I think we've already received roughly 18,000 pages of documents on this front. We'll be evaluating the cyber threat question and the government's ability to respond to that threat. We're also delving now deeply into the security and intelligence activities of the Global Affairs Department, something that has never been done before. We try to pursue some of these reviews in areas that have never been reviewed before, like the Department of National Defense, like CBSA, and of course, like GAC. What was your other question, sir?
And whether the committee will be looking into the security of elections and foreign interference, just if those two issues will be covered. So just the election side, I think, is.
Thank you. So as committee members may know, Cabinet in 2019 passed a directive creating a 5-person committee to be seized with activities during the 2019 election and basically be the recipients of information. This is a committee chaired by the clerk, be seized with this information that was coming in from different information providers and make a determination whether or not a certain threshold was crossed, applying a certain test as to whether this 5-person committee led by the clerk ought to communicate with Canadians something untoward or something inappropriate that might have been going on during the election. A recent report was just completed by the former Deputy Minister and Clerk, Jim Judd. I believe he was a clerk, and he has made that report public. That report is now still with the members of the NSECOP, of the National Security and Intelligence Committee. The unredacted version is with us. We are considering it now, and we'll have more to say about that in due course in commentary to the Prime Minister in terms of how this committee is structured, its mandate, etc.
Okay,
so we won't be looking so much at
On va pas. Je peux vous envoyer plus d'informations.
on cyber threats, if that would be helpful.
Sure, I would appreciate that. And I'd ask, Mr. Chair, how much time do I have?
Minute and a half.
Okay, so I think that as certainly the official opposition has been seized with the issue of Huawei. So I'm trying to meld a couple of questions that I have into one. And very simply, Mr. McGuinty, given this report and the work that this committee has done, do you believe that Canada should exclude Huawei from its 5G network?
Not a question I'm able to answer, Mr. Kurek, on behalf of the committee. It is not something the committee has examined. It's not a review that we've undertaken. We have, of course, had a lot to say about foreign interference in our review, and would commend you to that particular, those pages, which sets out in great detail what we believe is happening. So I wish I could give you some indication, but the committee has not pronounced itself on this.
Sure, no, and I appreciate that. There's two countries specifically named in these reports, and that's Russia and China, two countries widely reported to have acted against Canada and our allies. Experts who have appeared before this committee have suggested that China is a more complex actor, while Russia is more blunt and overt. Does Canada have different strategies in dealing with both of these foreign state actors and their involvement and possible threats to Canada?
We're unfortunately going to have to leave that important question there. I think Mr. McGuinty has already indicated he's in no position to answer that kind of a question. Possibly is, in which case you'll work answer in back on the next round of questions. Mr. Iacono, 6 minutes, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Welcome, colleagues. So in the NSECUP report, there are some mentions about the issues of foreign interference. You said that foreign interference is going to erode steadily our fundamental institutions as well as our democratic system. Could you provide more details how foreign powers such as China can manage to destabilize our democracy? Thank you, Mr. Iacono, for your question. In the report, there are 20 pages that provide details about specific incidents that occurred in Canada and abroad. I cannot tell you more than what is already in the report. There is a lot of classified information, but that information hasn't been shared in the public report. So here's my suggestion. Look at the case studies that were presented. Those case studies are quite detailed. And those case studies show you how foreign actors can act. We acknowledge that this is a huge problem for Canada and other countries. Those dangers related to foreign interference can be a source of fear and paranoia for Canadians, but foreign interference could also be the source of conspiracy theories. and those theories are spread through social media. Could you explain how our government should tackle those issues when communicating to Canadians? First, we have to remember the following. When we are talking about ethnocultural communities, we should not forget that those communities are targeted by foreign actors. Those communities are victims. They are victims here in Canada. The government has the duty to protect its citizens. The report has some recommendations, and one of our main recommendations is a pan-government approach to see how we react and cooperate between different levels of government. We have to review how we work with Canadians, our academic institutions, our politicians. We recommended twice that politicians and MPs are subject to a deep briefing related to foreign interference. All the recommendations are in the report. The recommendations are there so that the government can improve its work. We were inspired by the case study done in Australia. Australia has made a lot of stride. Anyway, we suggested to explore the Australian model for Canada. So you talked about the FBI as well as measures taken by Australia. So here's my question. What should be the measures to be undertaken by this government to make up for our delay? We have to keep working for a more centralized and more coordinated approach, especially with the National Security and Intelligence Advisor to the Prime Minister. We have to study the task force that was recently created in Australia. Such a task force should collaborate further with the government. Maybe for us in Canada, such a task force could collaborate with CSIS and other actors. All of this to say that there is a lot of work to do because there are a lot of risks. The committee agrees with what we said. All parties, both houses of the parliament, want to see action. Thank you. That's it for me, Mr. Chair.
Madame Michaud, 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Ms. Michaud. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for saying that you felt a little bit lost after reading this report, and so I am looking forward to hearing more about what Mr. McGuinty has to say. I'd like to ask questions about diversity and inclusion in the security and intelligence community. We've heard about many harassment, racism, and sexual violence cases through the RCMP as well as in our jail system. Recently, a report showed that such cases occurred between security officers and inmates. So, Mr. McGuinty, you reviewed all of this. So, I would like you to tell us more about the cases that you studied, more specifically for your report. Wow, what a question. Do we have 30 minutes to answer? So here is what we did. For the first time, we studied 9 agencies that work in security and intelligence. D&D, CSIS, Global Affairs, Privy Council Office, etc. I'm sorry, I don't know the word in French. We established a baseline. We wanted to compare performance, the representation of women, indigenous people, as well as visible minorities, people with disabilities. We didn't review the issues of violence and discrimination, but of course it is something that we mentioned to the government. That being said, we do not have access to the best talents in Canada. Why? Because we don't know what the status is within those 9 bodies. We know that studies conducted by FBI, CIA, and others show that diversity and inclusion in those bodies and communities help improve performance and responsibility for those agencies. And Mr. Chair, can I ask Ms. Marco to provide her input? Sure. What was the goal of our study? It was a 2-pronged goal. First, we wanted to show how diversity fares within the security and intelligence community. Second, we wanted to present programs and policies throughout those departments. Policies that were created to develop diversity and inclusion within those departments and bodies. Those were taken into account in our recommendations. Our main recommendation is that our committee should be able to review all of this 3 years from now based on improved data collection. Thank you. And I'd like to go back to what you said at the beginning, Mr. Quinty. I'm not sure I follow you. You were talking about best talents. How come we do not know the status with regard to this within the 9 bodies? So what's the status? It is rather positive, negative? Well, that's the question, Ms. Michaud. We want to find the answer to this question. Right now, we cannot tell Canadians whether things have improved or not. What is the committee trying to say? We want to get the best talents in Canada, but because there hasn't been any proper review with regard to diversity and inclusion within the security and intelligence community, we want to make sure that we have access to the best talents for that community. And such study should look at women, visible minorities, persons with disabilities, and indigenous people. This is why we want to create a baseline to make further review and move forward. The executives of those 9 bodies are aware of all of this. However, it hasn't been a high priority yet.
Mr. Harris, 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. McGinty, for your presentation and your report. I'll just touch briefly on the diversity and inclusion study, and it seems to me rather disappointing that there's been such slow progress. But you seem to be telling us you don't even know what the level of progress is. Although I note that you say that there seems to be a lack of engagement by the whole of these agencies, and is all left up to the HR department, which indicates a lack of real concern to actually achieve goals. And I'm wondering why your report simply asks for a 3 to 5 year review of where things are going, as opposed to insisting upon the setting of goals and targets and something like that. This seems to be an inadequate response to what you've clearly identified as slow progress.
Well, thank you, Mr. Harris. I think one of the things we did point out in the report, I think as possible, was we took a long, hard look at the Prime Minister's Tiger Team, which was created in 2016. And we called out the fact that the Tiger Team set up to develop performance measurement framework for the entire federal government hadn't met since June of 2018. So we believe there's supposed to be a report every 6 months to the Deputy Secretary of the Cabinet. So July 2018 was the last meeting that we could find. So we went as far as we felt we could as a committee to call on the government to make improvement, and we set the baseline because there hadn't been an examination, Mr. Harris, at all ever before that we could find of diversity and inclusion in the 9 organizations that constitute the community. So we felt it was important to call it out and to cite statistically and on an evidence base with the facts exactly where we stood. And now we're looking for progress. We've called on the government to take certain measures. We'll see what the government does.
Well, there seems to be a significant lack of commitment, obviously, that you've identified, and I think I'm surprised it didn't appear more obvious in your recommendations. But thank you for pointing that out. I'll have to search for those tables. The thing that interests me the most in your report, because we've been dealing with it in the Canada-China Committee, was the focus of an opposition motion last week in terms of foreign interference in Canada. And I'm not particularly referring to China, although we did hear witnesses saying some of the things that are reflected here in terms of going from one place to another. So your report notes a lack of coordination, for example, and a lack of direction to go in. And I'm wondering, looking at the problems noted here, the challenges the RCMP faces by the operations focus primarily on counterterrorism, that intelligence provided by CSIS is difficult to use as evidence supporting criminal investigations, public safety only recently identified and dedicated resources to the issue of foreign interference. Till late 2017, interdepartmental collaboration on foreign interference was ad hoc and issue specific, and that prioritizing areas of concern that are most important is just been needed to be addressed, and that work in this regard is in its early stages. It seems to me, Mr. McGuinty, that all of this adds up to a kind of a conclusion in my mind that the whole issue of foreign interference has not really been taken seriously by these agents that were focused on agencies that are either focused on other things or don't have their act together, as it were, and we're very late in the game in doing this. Was that your conclusion as well?
I think the committee members would agree that there's, of course, a lot of progress to be made. I think they would agree
You're
that
being kind. You're being kind, I think.
Well, I think they would agree that the nature of foreign interference is evolving. I think they would agree that the seriousness of the threats are becoming better known, and we've tried to describe those threats throughout the report, throughout that chapter, that review. We focused on the core community members and actors. We laid out as well what the community is already doing, but we believe we have to use the language I used during the press conference, up our game on foreign interference. And that is why we pointed to the most obvious, successful, we think, reaction in a Five Eye partner country to deal with foreign interference, and that is the example of what's taken place in Australia. And there are many reasons set out for that in the report as well. So we hope the reader comes to the conclusion that they understand better what is going on, what other countries are doing, how they're dealing with it. I wouldn't say we're necessarily late to the game. I think the question of foreign interference is one that most countries are struggling with. And so we've laid out the facts and the evidence based on classified information as best we can. Of course, a lot of it's been redacted. And now we're calling on the government to bring a much more centralized, interdepartmental, intergovernmental approach, and at the same time, inform Canadians and inform parliamentarians.
Thank you, Mr. Harris.
May I add something, Mr. Chair?
By all means.
Thank you. So just to add to what Mr. McGuinty said, I think it's important to point out that the time frame for our review was from January 2015 to August 2018. So the material we received reflects the findings and the status of the recommendations in our report. I think we do point out that, for example, CSIS has been talking and investigating about and investigating foreign interference since its creation. But we also point out that other departments, they don't necessarily neglect the threat, but their reaction and the whole of government reaction is very much ad hoc and on a case-by-case basis. So our recommendations are to strengthen the whole of government approach.
Thank you. You better not do this again, because Mr. Harris will start to think that his 6 minutes becomes 8 or 10. So with that, we have 25 minutes, colleagues, and I think we can actually squeeze in 6 more questions. So Mr. Van Popta, Madame Kara, 5 minutes each. Madame Michaud, Mr. Harris, 2.5 minutes each. Madame Stubbs, 5 minutes, and I'll have to be advised by my Liberal colleagues who would be the final 5 minutes. So with that, Mr. Van Popta.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and Mr. McGuinty, Ms. Marcoux. Mr. McGuinty, you had stated in answer to a question from my colleague, Mr. Kurek, plans to undertake or didn't undertake studies on foreign interference in elections, cyber threats and foreign acquisitions. But I think you said you were now going to undertake a study into cyber threats. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Is that your next study?
Sorry, it's one of our 2 next major reviews, which are now underway. It's an examination of cyber threats and the ability of the government to respond to those threats, keeping in mind as well, sir, that under new legislation, new powers, a private sector actor can now approach the Minister of National Defense and ask for assistance if required, if a private sector actor is now the subject of major cyber threat activity.
Okay, good. Thank you. Do you have any recommendations for studies that this committee take to be very good work that you're?
Well, you're breaking up there a little bit, sir, so I couldn't get all that. Sorry.
I think he was asking whether you have any recommendations for the Public Safety Committee to undertake that would be complementary to the work that you're undertaking.
It's always
you said it better than I did, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, thank you. It's always difficult. There's so many interesting areas, and we don't generally speak openly from the committee perspective what we are or are not doing. We simply come to ground on what we're doing, then we announce it, and then we only speak once we produce something. You can imagine many of us were asked to comment last week about the Opposition Day motion, and all fine and good, but we don't respond, in fact, at all. But I think one interesting area that the committee might consider is the whole question of the Investment Canada Act and the whole question of tests that may or may not be applied now for the foreign acquisition of Canadian companies, and the sufficiency or insufficiency of that test or the metrics that are used. That could be helpful in a Canadian context in an increasingly globalized world. But we have decided internally, Mr. Van Popta, to reduce the number of reports and reviews. You can see why, perhaps, with the document in front of you. We'll be staggering the release of those as well.
Good, thank you. Mr. McGinty, I think I'm not the only Canadian citizen who is surprised in reading this report at the extent to which Communist China seems to be infiltrating our media. And I'm referring particularly to paragraph 159 in your report, where there's a reference to a term, borrowing about to go out on the ocean, which I think is the implication there being that the People's Republic of China uses Western media to get their message out. I was shocked to hear to the extent to which that is happening. I guess my question is, going back to the Opposition Day motion about having a more robust relationship and reviewing that with our relationship with China, did the Prime Minister seek your advice as committee chair on the Opposition Day motion, which would seem to be very much in line with what your report?
No, he did not.
Suggest.
We've never spoken about that. Thanks for the question. We've never spoken about the Opposition Day motion, and I didn't participate in that debate. I'm hoping that the Opposition Day motion, though, will drive an awful lot of interest into the details laid out in this report, as you rightly point out. In this case, threats to media, what's going on, threats to our universities, threats to our ethnocultural communities, threats to the folks who are seeking public office. We thought it was really important to expose as much as we could, to be as transparent as possible, so Canadians understood the amplitude of the risk.
Good, thank you. We just want to congratulate. Sorry, am I out of time?
No, you've got half a minute.
Okay, just congratulate members of the Liberal Party who actually voted with us on that motion. Mr. McGinty, I noticed you weren't one of them, which in retrospect maybe surprises me given the thoroughness of your report highlighting the threats coming from China.
I knew I shouldn't have given you that extra time. Yeah. Madame Kara, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to both our witnesses, Mr. McGinty, for being here and for the incredible work that you and your committee does. I think it's extremely important. Perhaps, though, I can get you started on something very basic, because I find there are so many different versions or understanding of what foreign interference is amongst Canadians. But more importantly, there's a variety of different definitions of what foreign interference is across government agencies and department. If I can perhaps ask you to explain briefly what exactly foreign interference is, and if you can touch on in studying during your study, why do you think departments and agencies struggle to agree on the definition of foreign interference?
Well, that's an excellent question, and we try to tackle that, Ms. Kara, in the report in Chapter 2. In fact, in paragraph, I think it starts at paragraph 106, 107. And we talk about the definition, activities ranging from overt and often friendly forms of normal diplomatic conduct on the one hand to covert and hostile actions on the other. The CSIS Act goes some distance in describing what foreign interference is. And you rightly point out, one of the things we came up against fairly early on was the fact that there wasn't sort of a uniform nomenclature across the entire security and intelligence community, or an understanding. So, for example, if foreign interference were being exercised on the ground in a municipality somewhere, maybe a municipal election campaign, for example, or maybe in some other form or fashion, you wouldn't get necessarily an understanding from frontline police officers. If an outstanding female OPP officer came across something that might constitute foreign interference, she may not know what to do with it, or wouldn't understand it as foreign interference. So it's one of the things that we've addressed to lay out what it looks like. And again, in paragraph 108, we talk about the effects of foreign interference activities, what's at risk here, and it undermines a series of Canadian values.
Thank you. And thank you for bringing that up in terms of this in my line of questioning. I know, as you mentioned, one of the challenges of investigating suspected foreign interference is that these activities can take place alongside legitimate activities such as public diplomacy or academic collaboration, or may target specific ethnic diasporas to influence Canada's position domestically or internationally. Mr. McGinty, I represent one of the most diverse ridings in the country in Brampton West. Can you maybe talk a bit about what vulnerabilities does this pose to ethnic diaspora communities like mine? And I know sometimes many lines can be blurred to showcase if something is legitimate or illegitimate. Can you talk about the challenges that CSIS is having in investigating suspected foreign interference and how can it be addressed?
Maybe I can take a crack at it, maybe ask Ms. Marcoux to add something as well. Look, it's really important for committee members to hear our committee on this, and that is we're not singling out ethnocultural communities, as some have asked us in the past, because we want to negatively affect the perceptions of certain ethnocultural communities in Canada. On the contrary, we wanted to be really clear that it is different ethnic and cultural communities in Canada are the targets of foreign states. The committee emphasizes that these communities should be free from foreign threats and inducements. They're targets. And that's why, for example, we also highlight a measure that was passed through China, which basically extends extraterritorially a responsibility to Chinese Canadian nationals who are here, a so-called responsibility back to China. That is also laid out in detail in the report. Maybe Ms. Marcoux could answer a little bit of that as well, if you're okay.
Just a little less than a minute, please. Thank you.
Sure. So just getting back to your question about CSIS, then the foreign investigation to be initiated for foreign interference, it has to be very clearly presented or seen as detrimental to the interest of Canadians in Canada and of a clandestine or deceptive nature. So any activity that constitutes lawful advocacy, protest, or dissent, specifically excluded from investigation. But it's also why it's been so difficult for government and for certain agencies to present the threat from foreign interference, because it is so complex and can be misconstrued as legitimate discussions or protest.
Thank you.
I hope that
Thank you.
answers. Yeah.
Yeah, just the tech team has said to Madame Kara, could you move the boom on your mic up slightly? I don't know. Well, I'll leave it to you. You know, if they said up, but you got it down. Anyways, Madame Michaud, 2.5 minutes, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to discuss the CBSA portion in your report. You recommended for the Minister of Public Safety to develop directives for intelligence activities or defense intelligence activities and clear recommendations for accountability and annual reporting. What we see in this report, this should have been done or produced from the minister months ago or years ago. CBSA would have asked back in 2013 for instructions or clear instructions which weren't given yet. The agency, from what the press learned in the past weeks, approved certain directives, but there was no instruction from the minister. I would like to know, in your mind, why that wasn't officially published or why those directives weren't officially published yet. And the government seems to blame COVID-19 since this was supposed to be approved last February, but it seems to fit in with a larger picture. Could you say a few words on that? If I understood your question clearly, Mrs. Michaud, you're asking me about you want to know if the agency has authorities to send directives, or the minister? Does the minister have authority to send directives? The minister is supposed to send clear directives to CBSA on accountability and directives that are expected from the agency that the agency has been expecting for a few years. And the previous Conservative government hadn't done so either. So based on your recommendation, could you elaborate on that? Could Mrs. Marcoux add something on that? Yes, absolutely. We haven't received a response from the minister yet. Within this review, we
saw that there weren't any ministerial directives, but we haven't heard a response as to why yet.
Harris, 2.5 minutes, please. You're on mute, Jack.
Sorry. Yes, thank you, Chair. Mr. McGuinty, thank you for your report. It's very sobering. I've got dozens of questions, but little time. But I will ask, I will note that the government has had this report for 15 months now. So the kind of responses that we're just talking about should already have been done. And I'm assuming that the government will have no trouble within 30 days to come up with a real robust plan in accordance with the motion of last week. But my question is more specific, dealing with one of your recommendations, which talks about assessing the adequacy of existing legislation that deals with foreign interference. I'm assuming that that's because you found various shortcomings in the legislation as it exists, and I wonder if you could take take a few minutes to outline some of the inadequacies or some of the shortcomings or something that should be done to improve the ability of Canada to protect against foreign interference.
Would you be able, Mr. Harris, to point me in the right direction towards the right recommendation, the number?
So, well, I'm just looking at a briefing note here now, which talks about your comprehensive strategy for government, which talks about identifying short and long-term risks, etc. But it says assess the adequacy of existing legislation that deals with foreign interference, such as the Security of Information Act or the Canadian Security Intelligence Service Act, and make proposals for changes if required. So yes. I think you did identify some inadequacies, and I'm just wondering if you could elaborate on what they are.
I can't right now off the top of my head. I'd have to find the operative passages in the report for you, which I'd be very pleased to do through the chair. Send you a written response in terms of those details, because I'm sure they're there. But I think this was formulated by the committee, that particular part of the recommendation, when I reflect back on the deliberations. It was about trying to make sure that a full examination, including the legislative and regulatory underpinnings of what was going on, were actually examined. Were all these pieces properly connecting? Were the powers exercised by one organization aligned with powers organized elsewhere? Was there a chance to, for example, up the understanding of what foreign interference is or is not? So I think the idea was that part and parcel of a government-wide response to foreign interference would include a necessary examination of the legislative underpinnings.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. I'll have to leave it there. We've got 2 5-minute questions left. Madame Stubbs, 5 minutes, and then Madame Damov, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's my understanding that I'll be taking this round. I think rural internet connectivity has to do largely with that. So, and I'm getting the thumbs up from
like Ms. Stubbs. No.
and could never replace her very, very valuable contributions. But thank you very much, and it's good to be able to continue asking these questions. In paragraph 290 and in the report, it says, quote, the government's public engagement on foreign interference has been limited. And a little bit later says, again, quote, there are no strategies or threat assessments to inform Canadians of foreign interference analogous to the yearly reports on terrorism. The report goes on to mention Operation Fox Hunt, which has been in the media as of late, in which the Communist Party of China threatens Chinese Canadians on Canadian soil. Has the committee reviewed whether or not the government has any measures to encourage Chinese Canadians to come forward to authorities and report any threats of intimidation they may be experiencing?
That's an excellent question, Mr. Kurek, and I don't recollect, and I'll have to get back to you on whether we examine that in detail, and I want to be very careful about what I do or don't say about that. Given sources and methods. I do share, and I'm glad you raised paragraph 290 around the very limited public engagement. Our understanding is that only the CSIS director has given a very powerful statement, first in a foundational speech, and then just several weeks ago, talking about the threat of foreign interference. But maybe if I could again, because she has a greater institutional memory, and perhaps Ms. Marcoux can offer something for you.
Sure.
You're right, Mr. Kirk, in the sense that there is no overall, or we did not come across or find an overall threat assessment produced by the government on foreign interference. And in fact, it is one of, I think, our major findings, major recommendations, is that be included as part of any government threat assessment. And it's also why the 2018 report from the first committee presented foreign interference as part of a review of threats to Canada. But Mr. McGuinty is right. The CSIS director has been among the most vocal in terms of talking about the threat of foreign interference, with a few speeches from ministers of public safety.
Okay, thank you very much for that. There is a fentanyl epidemic in this country, as we're all aware, and it's not limited specifically to fentanyl, but that sort of types of narcotics. And we're learning that a lot of this fentanyl is coming from China, flooding the country, and it destroys families and society, and certainly appears to be of strategic benefit to foreign state actors, specifically the Chinese Communist Party. Is there an aspect of foreign interference? Is this an aspect of foreign interference that your committee has heard about?
No, it's not something that we examined. We may have heard about it,
okay,
but it's not something we examined in detail.
Okay, no, I appreciate that. The report talks about the Chinese Communist Party using a strategy of pushing their political messaging through mainstream international media. Are you aware of whether or not that has been the case in Canada? If there's any examples where that might have been the case on Canadian networks such as CBC, CTV, other television or print media based in Canada?
Any and all comments I can make around media and foreign interference in that sector are in the report. We've highlighted and illustrated as best we can, Mr. Kurek, what we knew, what we came across. Of course, once again, this report is the redacted version of a much longer report, backstopped by, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, almost 30,000 pages of material.
Okay, and one final question. I hope I have enough time for a quick question, Mr. Chair.
30 seconds. Okay. 30 seconds.
Have you received a response from the Prime Minister or the Public Safety Minister on these reports that you've sent to them?
We've had a general acknowledgement, and we'll have likely more to say about this as we produce our 2020 annual report for the Prime Minister, something the committee is seized with. But we were pleased to see that at least in 2 mandate letters, there was a reference to an NSECOP recommendation and action called on from the Ministers of National Defence and Public Safety to revisit the overall legal framework for the conducting of intelligence activities at the Department of National Defence and the Canadian Armed Forces.
Thank you, Mr. Kirk. We're going to have to leave it there. Madame Demoff, final 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. And Mr. McGuinty, I first want to thank you for your leadership. I was part of the Public Safety Committee that reviewed the bill to create your committee, and you've been its first and only chair. And I just want to thank you for your leadership in doing something that the government hadn't done before. So your report talks about the benefits of diversity and how it's not being done particularly well. I'm just wondering if you could elaborate a little bit on why diversity is a good thing to do, not from an inclusion point of view, but from a public safety point of view. And also if you think that systemic racism plays a role in the challenges that you've highlighted in your report.
Well, thank you very much, Ms. Dema, first of all, for your gracious remarks. It's been quite a journey for all of us on the committee, and we're really proud of the fact that we've managed to produce a series of nonpartisan reports adopted by members of all parties in both houses. So we hope that this might serve as a precedent, actually, in a difficult time when perhaps we need more nonpartisanship and we need more cooperation on the floor of the House to be able to move the country forward. And we certainly think that's an important approach to bring to national security. We did not look at the question of systemic racism per se inside our institutions or within the public service in particular. It's clear members I think would agree that it's ripe for recognizing the long-standing barriers that racialized minorities face in Canada and the need to dismantle those barriers everywhere. We did include, however, and we made sure to indicate in this diversity and inclusion review, we did include international comparative evidence that was studies that were undertaken by a couple of other organizations, and Ms. Marcoux can chime in here, the FBI, the CIA, and some other comparative information and analysis that indicates that those organizations in the security and intelligence community that are more diverse and more inclusive, are higher performing. And so not only is it, the committee feels, the membership of the Events Cup feels, not only is it foolish in and of itself to leave people behind and not be able to reach out and engage as many as we can in productive roles, it's also affecting the overall performance of the security and intelligence community.
You're on, Pam.
Sorry, Chair. Did Ms. Marcoux want to comment on that or not?
Yes, I think to add on to what Mr. McGuinty said is that the committee, and it looked at its counterpart in the ISC as well, but it felt very strongly based on the studies that the more language skills an organization has, the more community contacts, the more cultural competencies, for example, the better it is and the more flexible and open-minded it is to look at threats and to conduct its investigations. And as we've seen, it is less prone, for example, to what is called groupthink in an organization that is not diverse.
Thank you. Chair, I think I'm good at that. If
okay,
we want to
well,
end it there.
that's fine. We do have a minute and a half left, but I thank you for helping out with running the clock. One of the reasons that we have these meetings is that you can put flesh on what can be a dry and confusing report, and both Mr. McGuinty and Madame Marcoux have done exactly that, to the point where, as Mr. Harris says, we've got dozens of questions, and I noted the exchange with Mr. Iacono about how other countries make their colleagues aware of not only the content of these studies, but they raise the general awareness. So I think, Mr. McGuinty, you and I are going to have an offline conversation about how we can make sure that your reports and your works get a larger audience than possibly an hour before the Public Safety Committee. So again, thank you for your absolutely outstanding work. Please, on behalf of the committee, thank your colleagues on the committee for us, and as you can see, you've really stimulated the interest of members. So thank you, colleagues. With that, we'll suspend for 2 minutes while we re-empanel. Again, thank you, Madame Marcoux and Mr. McGuinty.
Thank you very much.
Robin Maynard as an author, and Mr. Boubiniere as a community activist. So I'll call on you for 7 minutes each, according to the order in which you are in the order papers. So with that, Madame Maynard, you have 7 minutes, please.
If I may just ask for your indulgence, Ms. Michaud is not in the room right now. Maybe we can wait. It's okay, just wait a minute until she comes back.
Well, we do have a quorum, and we do, we don't have a hard stop at 6 o'clock, but we do have a tentative stop at 6 o'clock. Do we know where Christina is?
Yeah, I think she'll be back in a minute or two, Mr. Chair. It's kind of hard, I think, with the distance. I think you may not have seen her step out, but she's out.
Well, I don't. I think if she's out, she's out, and I think we should start. So with that, Madame Maynard, 7 minutes, please.
Thank you for having me. I have published extensively in peer-reviewed literature on racial and gendered harms of policing in Canada's past and present, most notably Policing Black Lives, State Violence in Canada from Slavery to the Present. I'm also a PhD student and Vanier Scholar at the University of Toronto. I'll be forwarding today an evidence-supported argument that sheds light on the increasingly popular and publicly supported calls across Canada to defund the police and highlight the potential, should this be taken up, to meaningfully address the systemic racism that is embedded into policing in Canada. The first point that I wanted to lay forward is that rather than upholding for many communities, policing is more accurately understood as a form of harm, particularly for Black communities and for Indigenous communities, as well as racialized communities, people living with mental health or substance use issues. For example, American Public Health Association 2018 policy statement affirms that law enforcement violence is a public health issue, addressing that police violence is itself a form of harm in our society. My work documents rampant racial profiling since the creation of police forces across Canada, documenting since the 19th century the heightened policing of Indigenous men and women, of Black men and women, and of other racialized communities. Studies conducted in Toronto, Edmonton, Montreal, Halifax, and Vancouver demonstrate that Black people are stopped by police at a rate anywhere from 2 to 6 times more frequently than white residents. Reports that came out by CBC and Radio Canada of dozens of Indigenous women being sexually or physically subjected to violence by the police, as well as police assaults of Majisa Phillips, Santana Rao, and other Black women, address that there is also a gendered element at stake in this systemic racism within policing in this institution. We know that this also has resulted in death, and that Black people are 20 times more likely to be shot by police in Toronto, according to the Ontario Human Rights Commission. Funding has continually increased for policing in Canada in a manner that is unparalleled to many other public services. For example, national spending on police operations has increased since the mid-90s, reaching $15.1 billion in 2017 to 2018. A 2013 government report noted that the cost of policing nationally has more than doubled since 1997, outpacing the increase, they note, in spending by all levels of government, including police salaries, which have increased by 40% since 2000, whereas most Canadian salaries have increased by 11%, according to Public Safety Canada. In the context of a COVID-19 economic downturn, reprioritizing has never been more crucial. We are also in a period where we have seen the increasing militarization of policing with particular harms for Black and Indigenous communities. For example, a report by Kevin Walby and Rosier in 2018 noted that the use of SWAT teams or tactical squads had increased by 2,000% over the last 4 decades, increasingly using police for routine activities, they write, such as executing warrants, traffic enforcement, community policing in response to mental health crises. For Black communities in particular, this militarization has at times been fatal or violent. For example, Somali refugee communities experienced raids in which they were assaulted with battering rams and flashbang devices, which an elderly Somali woman described as being physically brutalized, and in one instance told to die in the context of a tactical raid. In tandem with rising militarization and budgets, there has been an expanded scope in terms of an ever-expanding role for police officers in response to mental health calls present at schools, in schools more broadly, We've also seen a dramatic rise in police killings over the last 20 years. A CBC study called Deadly Force highlighted the number of deaths at the hands of police have nearly doubled over the past 20 years, particularly impacting Black and Indigenous communities. It's important to look to several limited reforms that have not reduced the funding, power, and scope or militarization of police and have also been ineffective in ending racial profiling and violence at policing. A 2018 Yale study, the most extensive to date, for example, found that body cams were not an effective way of addressing racism or violence in policing. A recent study conducted by Concordia University's Dr. Ted Rutland addressed how community policing, frequently proffered as a reform, has actually been both ineffective in ending systemic racism and has actually helped to expand and retrenched the harms of racialized policing even further in Montreal. Decades of feminist anecdotal evidence, as well as more documented evidence, has demonstrated the ineffectivity of police trainings. And of course, civilian oversights continue to be decried in the media and by access to information that show that there is not only a lack of independence being staffed largely by former police officers, but few investigations lead to charges and 0 or less than 1% of criminal convictions. This suggests that policing in Canada is not only flawed at a cosmetic level, but that the harms, racial and gendered, are structurally embedded into the institution itself. Police defunding.
Excuse me, Madame Maynard.
Yes.
You're speaking very quickly, and the interpreters are having a bit of a challenge keeping up with you. If you could just slow it down a touch, it'll be helpful.
No problem.
Thank you very much.
I'm proposing that the assortment of changes forwarded under the banner of defund the police are the most appropriate towards meaningfully addressing the issue of systemic racism in Canadian policing. Ending systemic racism requires that we undertake changes to minimize, reduce people's encounters with the police in a variety of ways. That is to say that only reducing policing can reduce the harm in policing. I will now briefly turn towards articulating what this means. Of course, much of what is being articulated at this time is related to public budget allocation, looking at the grossly disproportionate amount of public money that is spent and taxpayer money spent on policing each year compared to other vital issues such as shelters, long-term care, public education, and social housing. But more broadly, there is also within this call a move to decrease, minimize, and move away from a reliance on police in a way that is vastly more substantive, reducing the budget, in addition though, reducing the scope and reducing the power of policing are manners in which we are able to address the issue of systemic injustice more broadly. So reducing the scope, for example, is about minimizing areas where policing has been found to be most harmful. So for example, we can see the removal of police officers in schools in the Toronto District School Board, now seen as well in Hamilton, and there is important work being done advanced in this regard in Winnipeg and Vancouver. Reducing the scope has also been a push to ending police responses to mental health calls, given the tragic deaths of Regis Kaczynski-Paquet, DeAndre Campbell, and other Black and Indigenous and other people killed by police in the context of mental health crises. Ending police accompaniments to drug overdose calls has long been advocated by harm reduction practitioners as a way to reduce overdose death, and ending policing collaboration with Canada Border Services. These are all ways to reduce the scope of policing and the reach that it has in its harm over day-to-day people's lives. Another element of this is reducing.
Well, if you could just wind it up there, please. We're close. You're over some time.
All right. Well, we had to stop for a little while there, but I suppose
yeah.
I will
So we gave you.
by,
I did allocate more time to you.
Okay. So in addition to reducing power, there's also reducing the militarization and of course, building and supporting alternatives. So to conclude, I would argue that acknowledging systemic racism is a step, but a systemic response is needed to get to the heart of the issue, and the push to reduce budgets, scope and scale of policing and invest in community-based safety is the most meaningful way to address the deeply embedded crisis of racism in police forces across Canada. And we also have an unprecedented public support at this time. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Mr. Boubiniere, I don't wish to interrupt witnesses. It doesn't give me any great joy. So if you could just kind of keep an eye on the chair towards the end of your presentation, and I'll try to give you signals of 1 minute or 2 minutes or something like that, so that I'm not interrupting. With that, Mr. Boubiniere, you have 7 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. My name is Mitch Bourbonniere, and I've been involved in community outreach groups that patrol the streets of inner city Winnipeg for the last 30 years, beginning with the Bear Clan, the original Bear Clan in 1990. Today, we have at least 6 different groups that walk the streets of Winnipeg as a peacekeeping, racialized peacekeeping groups. We have the Thunderbirds, we have Community 204, we have Initiative, we have the Mama Bear Clan, the Bear Clan, and OPK, all walking the streets of Winnipeg. OPK is an organization that supports and welcomes and looks after young men and women that have who are asking for a better life after being involved in the child welfare system, the justice system, involved in street life, gangs, and prison. We provide wraparound support around such issues as housing, income, employment, education, addiction, mental health, and connecting our participants to their original cultures. Despite experiencing poverty, family breakdown, trauma, and violence, as well as involvement in child welfare and youth justice systems, these young people ask for and demand a better life. They work extremely hard to turn their lives around. It is very discouraging to them when society, and more specifically the police and the justice system, treat them as with suspicion and mistrust and as incorrigible. I have one young man who was horrifically abused as a child and grew up in an unforgiving child welfare system, only to eventually to take a life of a rival gang member in a dispute. He was 15 years old at the time. He spent the next 15 years in federal prison. Coming out a couple of years ago as a 30-year-old, he worked relentlessly to turn his life around, getting his education, his driver's license, stable housing. He is now fully employed, drives his own vehicle, and is a parent to a young daughter. Because the police have the ability to scan license plates in traffic, he is regularly pulled over because of his past and questioned aggressively and accused of all kinds of things by police. I know this is anecdotal, but these stories have been told to me over and over and over again in the last 30 years. Although this is extremely discouraging, he has come to accept that this is just going to happen. The other young people in my program tell me countless stories of being stopped while walking in the community and being questioned by police and asked for identification for no apparent reason. Another area of concern is when police are dispatched to do wellness checks with police who are already in crisis and have had previous negative experiences with police, and the situation can escalate quickly. I realized that there are many excellent individual police officers and that the action of a few can paint the reputation and perception of all police. I have heard this being as dismissed as, oh, it's just a few bad apples. It is my belief that we cannot afford even one bad apple in the police service, as this poisons the perception of police by the community. Just like it would not be acceptable for the airline industry to have a few bad apple pilots, we need to ensure police are properly recruited, investigated, and vetted, and that they receive intensive ongoing training around racialized communities and empathy. I would like, I've actually had some good experiences with the Winnipeg police in downtown Winnipeg with their foot patrol actually asking us, members of the Bear Clan and OPK, to walk with them because they find it easier to work with the people, the unsheltered folks in downtown Winnipeg when we're there with them. I think it's helpful to community members to actually see people from their own background that are doing well, that are out there trying to help and be supportive to them. I'd like to see more women in the police. I'd like to see more Indigenous people in the police and people of color. And that is what I have to say at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Bourbonniere. With that, Mr. Motts, you have 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the witnesses for being here. Mr. Bourbonnaire, I want to spend some time on your background and testimony. I've had the privilege of meeting with the Odd Squad in Vancouver and Marcel Wilson, the One by One movement in Toronto, and as a police officer for over 3 decades in my own community, we know that proactive prevention has it does pay long-term dividends. Can you explain from the work that you do to this committee, that you and others do, that can lead to some real better social outcomes over time?
Well, for me, I think the key is relationship, is ensuring that the community not only is safe, but feels safe and has the perception that they are going to be treated in a good way. And unfortunately, that just hasn't been the case over the years. So many people have had at least individual micro moments with the police that have been awful. And word spreads and the community gets a certain perception of police. As I said before, the police service is like any other system. There are some good people and there are some people that aren't very healthy in that system. And so I think it's incumbent upon us to ensure that we are recruiting good people, that they're well investigated, that they're tested, that they receive all the training that they need to deal with diversity, to deal with mental health, and to deal with serving the community. But it's all about relationship with the community.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you for those comments. I'm curious to know from your experience and perspective, Mr. Bourbonnaire, and engaging directly with the community, because that's what you're boots on the ground. You deal with individuals in the throes of their experience and trying to make things better for their lives firsthand. So how, from your experience, has tensions between the police and victims and calls to defund the police been seen on the ground by the community you serve?
I think I'm very, I welcome what's been happening, because we're hearing the voices of marginalized people. We're hearing people speak out, some of them for the first time. Obviously, there needs to be change. There needs to be trust rebuilt. They talk about reconciliation. It's hard to have reconciliation if there hasn't been conciliation to begin with. So I think there needs to be way more consultation with the community. I think the community voice needs to be heard. I don't believe that lip service is acceptable anymore. This has to be put into action by police services. They need to engage the community. They need to meet with the community. They need to be speaking with the community, inviting the community into their circle and vice versa.
Thank you very much for that. You've been at this for how many years?
We started Bear Clan in 1990.
So you're got things figured out. You've been doing it a long time. In those years, sir, what's the best policy that you've seen to date that really improves the communities that you serve or work in? Some things that are really working well in your community. I know I've been to Winnipeg. I've heard of the Bear Clan. I've seen some of the work that's been done there, OPK. What community work is being done in your experience that really makes a difference and has not only immediate impact, but long-term positive impact on the communities that we're addressing here in this study?
I think just getting out boots to the street. We deliver food, we deliver clothing, we deliver warmth and good cheer to our community members, and they learn to trust us. And then once they trust us, they reach out and ask for the help that they need to better their lives in terms of accessing shelter, in terms of maybe seeing their children again, taking steps heading towards rebuilding their lives. I think what's really important that we do not have enough of is people, whether it's the police and community members like Bear Clan and OPK walking together, but we need many more. We need the partnership between the police and the community groups, but we need them walking together and not just in vehicles, but actually walking in the communities and talking with people and interacting with people, interacting with the children and the women and the people of that community, as well as storefront walk-in welcoming centers where police and groups like the Bear Clan and OPK can be in those centers, and people can come in and talk to the police and talk to the community groups. Just that accessibility.
Thank you, Mr. Motz. With that, Madame Demoff, 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to both our witnesses for the excellent testimony. Ms. Menard, how do you pronounce your surname? I'm sorry, I want to make sure I get it right.
It's Maynard, thank you.
It is Maynard, okay. You've written about racialized surveillance and how, and Mr. Bourbonnier, you've spoken about it as well in your remarks, but you've written that when it comes to gangs, the number of white kids in gangs is actually greater than the number of black kids in gangs, and that the number of white kids and black kids using drugs is actually the same, but it's the black kids who are grossly overrepresented in the criminal justice system. Training and education seems to only perpetrate the misconceptions in police services and sort of puts in a mindset of the police service these misconceptions. So even if it's not overt racialized surveillance, it's still happening. How do we change that within police services? Now, bearing in mind the RCMP is the only police service under federal jurisdiction, but I'm just wondering if you have any suggestions on how we deal with this racialized surveillance of Black people in particular, but I would also argue Indigenous peoples as well.
Absolutely, I think you're right that the numbers bear out that Indigenous people, and in particular Indigenous women, also experience significant rates of racial profiling in Canadian society. Now, to continue with a little bit what I was trying to get at with my presentation, and thank you so much for your question, is that whether we look towards increased police training or whether we look towards the increased community policing, we see that these are things that do not fundamentally get to the heart of racialized policing and the racialized surveillance that you're so importantly highlighting. So I think what we really need to do is work really towards minimizing the encounters that Black communities are having with police. So if we look, for example, to the deployment of often what are so-called anti-gang squads, are frequently squads, for example, that of Eclipse that was put forward in Montreal, that were substantively involved in the mass racial profiling of Black communities, particularly in the Montreal North and the Saint Michel region. We actually saw a significant budgetary increase allocations because they described it as the increased perceptions of crime that was not related to the actual increase of crime, but this ended up massively expanding the racialized surveillance of Black and Indigenous youth in the neighborhood. So this is why I'm suggesting the reduction actually of policing budgets, the reduction of actually policing of those neighborhoods, and the rediversion of funds for things that keep communities safe, such as community centers, such as anti-violence programs that are not connected to police, but are about building communities safely differently. If we also move towards the decriminalization of drugs, for example, which we already know is something that increases risks of hepatitis C, of HIV, of overdose death, as well as contributing to the mass incarcerations of Black communities in Canada, even as we know that criminalization does nothing to address the real harms associated with drug use. So something such as the criminalization of drugs, the decriminalization of drugs could really substantively impact the well-being of Black communities.
Thank you for that. That was actually going to be my next question, was about the decriminalization of drugs. So thank you for working that into that answer. One of the misconceptions out there is that if you remove police from a neighborhood, it makes it more unsafe. From your research, is that actually true?
I think that we need to remember that the call for defunding is not only about removing police, but it's about providing alternatives that would build safety that would not require policing. So if we give an example, we can look to, the policing of encampments in Toronto or in Hamilton, where people are routinely made to leave the places where they are living outside. Now, of course, being offered long-term affordable or free housing is an alternative that does not require policing, for example, right? So the presence of safety, the presence of healthy food, the presence of decent housing is something that provides much more safety than law enforcement officers can. So of course, it's always a double-pronged choice, which is not only about divesting, but about reinvesting. So making sure that it's not only taking something away, but putting something in place.
I'm going to stop you only because I only have a minute left, and I want to ask about Mr. Beaubonnier. One of the gaps in what we look at is urban policing, and you don't get any federal funding to run your programs. I suspect you struggle for funding, period, for your programs. I'm just wondering if we're going to tackle the issues of systemic racism in policing. Does the federal government need to be investing in urban policing?
You're on mute, Mr. Beaubonnier.
Yes, sorry. I would say absolutely. The more resources that can be afforded to community groups, the better. So I totally agree with Ms. Maynard that it's not about under-resourcing a community. It's about actually resourcing it in the absence of a heavy police presence. So to have the police step down and to have community groups step up, I think is the answer, and that will take federal resources.
Thank you, Ms. Damoff. Madame Michaud, six minutes, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My first question is for Mr. Bourbonniere. An article was published recently that drew my attention, and I'd like to hear what you think about it. It's pretty incredible and unacceptable to see that type of thing, and justifies even more the work we do here to find alternatives. So the article is about a 30-year-old man who was victim of a kind of kidnapping in Quebec, in Val d'Or. And the article is partly in English.
Anishinaabe has a name. They call it a starlight tour. When police pick up an Indigenous person for being disruptive, drunk, or simply being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Once they have them in the patrol car, they drive the person outside city limits and force them to walk back. Ça semble être, comme je le disais,
So this seems to be a situation that happens throughout Canada and in Quebec. And I would like to know that for your organization, have you heard of these starlight tours and practices? I know there isn't a magic solution, but what should we do to make sure that this doesn't happen, where people of authority cannot discriminate this way some communities?
Me?
Yes.
Okay. And I apologize for not responding in French, although I did understand you as you spoke in French. That the horrible phenomena of police picking up people, especially people of color and Indigenous people, and driving them out of the city in the wintertime only to be left out there, really peaked in the 1990s. 4 young indigenous men actually died, froze to death, just outside of Saskatoon in the 1990s. And certainly when I started this work, we would hear this regularly and routinely from some of the young people that we worked with. It has not occurred that we know of. It has not occurred in Winnipeg in recent years.
Just for your help, Mr. Beaubonnier and Madame Maynard, at the bottom of the screen is a globe, and you can press the globe to get simultaneous English or French translation. So, Madame Michaud, Michaud, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And my question, the next part of my question is for you again, Mr. Beaubonniere. You work with Indigenous youth, and how do you see the way they're impacted by the way society or police officers or people of authority act towards them. What type of impact does that have on their life and or future lives?
Question, thank you. There's actually two schools of thought that come out of the police towards Indigenous youth. One is suspicion and mistrust, and always believing that these young people might be criminally involved, sometimes with absolutely no reason or evidence. But there's another thought that comes towards Indigenous people that's equally as hurtful, harmful, and devastating, and that is dismissing critical incidences such as missing people, missing Indigenous women and girls, blaming lifestyle. Like there's always assumptions made if someone is missing or if someone's in crisis that they're to blame, and there isn't the same desperation to honor a request for help when it is an Indigenous person rather than someone that's non-Indigenous in Winnipeg. So those two negative experiences that come toward the young Indigenous people get ingrained. They internalize it, and the police is a symbol. The RCMP is a symbol, and they're an authority, and they're powerful, and they have power, and they have privilege. So when young people feel so much negativity towards them, suspicion, mistrust, and not taking their concerns seriously when they are in crisis, when they are in trouble, or they are missing, leads them to believe that they are less than, and that is unconscionable.
Merci. Et finalement, j'aimerais peut-être...
Thank you. I would also like to talk about witnesses who said that training for police officers in mental health, addictions, and things that would help on the ground. I liked what Mrs. Odette told us last week, where police officers can't be superheroes. They can't have a 360 training in every aspect. Do you think organizations like your own could support them on the ground and help them?
Seconds for that response, please.
Is that Ms. Maynard or myself?
Vous, Monsieur Bourbonnière.
It's for you.
Okay. Yes. We can train people to do the mental health checks and to do to be on scene for non-violent types of situations, so that we can be helpful and the police can take a step back. That would be incredible.
Thank you, Madame Michaud. Mr. Harris, 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Ms. Menard, listening to you talk about lessening the amount of contact with racialized people, particularly Black people, reminds me of my own thoughts as a young law student and studying criminal law. And I concluded at one point that the only crime was coming to the attention of the police. So it reminds me of that thought that I had as a first encountering all of the laws and how they were enforced. So you have said there should be reducing contact is a good idea to save the individuals from being over policed. Is that your point that I get? By when you say defunding or removing police from certain situations, can you confirm that that's what you're talking about?
Sure, that was one part of it, was reducing their scope from different situations, including the proactive policing of the places where Black peoples live.
So this community policing thing is not a solution in your view?
If we look to the studies on community policing, it's incredibly clear, particularly that published by Dr. Rutland recently, which is that although originally many communities had aspirations of a positive relationship with the police, what it ended up doing was actually retrenching and even increasing police profiling and racialized surveillance and arrests of Black communities more extensively. So in effect, it was an expansion of policing in another format, as opposed to something that is, again, reducing those harms. So it did not set out, or it did not achieve the goal of reducing systemic racism within policing, not at all.
We only have a short time, so I do want to put the same issue to Mr. Barenbourg, because you talked about, in a sense, having a different form of contact with the community. And in Winnipeg, I understand there's probably 1/10 of the population is Indigenous, and that the bias in policing is pretty obvious, as you pointed out. We were told by Madame Odette last week that she believed, as the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls Commission found, that every place where there is a substantial Indigenous population, there ought to be a direct involvement with the police force, at the very minimum, an advisory committee, an advisory group, and then moving to perhaps Indigenous policing units. Is that something that would make any sense in an urban setting like Winnipeg, Mr. Barenbourg, in your view, or is this would it be preferable that the work that your groups do be funded as some sort of auxiliary to that?
So my overall opinion is, in a way, both. I think less involvement by police where it's a space of power and authority situation. So for them to step down and not be seen in that way, but maybe more involvement with the community in a more proactive way.
You mentioned more Indigenous police officers. Would you support? I mean, because we've been talking about Indigenous policing, perhaps in communities of Indigenous people, that they would do the policing themselves. In an urban setting, is that possible? Could there be a unit, for example, of Indigenous police force officers that work in the communities where there's large Indigenous populations? Is that a possibility as a model, or is there any kind of model that you would see as being beneficial?
Yeah, the either more recruitment of Indigenous police officers, but also putting them in once trained, putting them in positions of as consultants and mediators between the police and the community as well.
So that would be part of the path to a greater, less bias in policing because of the involvement of Indigenous people at that level.
Yes, and again, also more partnership with community groups.
And that would you see that as something that ought to be able to be funded by the government of Canada as part of its reconciliation model and its responsibilities for Indigenous persons generally?
Yes, I believe the federal government can role model for provincial and civic governments that this is a priority.
And so they can either role model and perhaps even fund it directly.
Well, that
would at least offer that funding. Yeah.
Yes, by coming to the table with resources, that would be, leading by example.
And so your groups, you mentioned that there's about 6 of them doing this kind of work, actively patrolling and being in the community on a regular basis. That's mostly directed at providing assistance, and you must, and your groups must, do a fair bit of mediation as it is already in terms of liaising with police forces who happen to be in a situation.
Yeah, in fact, if we're on scene first, we're doing a lot of diffusing and we're doing a lot of de-escalating where police don't need to be called in because we've done the work already.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. I think we're unfortunately going to have to leave it there. Colleagues, we've got 25 minutes worth of questions to squeeze into 15 minutes. I'm going to run a bit over 6 o'clock. So with that, I'm going to ask Mr. Van Popta for 5 minutes, please.
Good. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here. So, Ms. Maynard, I've listened to your testimony with great interest. You're talking about advocating for defunding of the police, but listening to you carefully, it sounds like you're talking about reallocating resources, not necessarily defunding the police, but reallocating resources so that people in need are getting the attention that they require. Can any of that reallocation of resources, in your professional opinion, be done within the scope of current police forces, the RCMP or municipal police, for example?
Thank you for the question. I believe that, I am talking about reallocation to some extent, of course, of, substantively cutting police budgets, but also about reducing the scope, reducing the power of police, just to clarify. But I do think that it's very important that we understand that these calls are explicitly addressing moving that money out of policing, period, and into community or other more appropriate organizations, just because of the ongoing link in the ways that, for example, even when police are accompanied by a social worker, for example, that still can lead to the harm and death or somebody in police custody, that it really is about minimizing the encounters in order to stop the harms of criminalization, to understand that even something like police stops and carding, even though they're not a direct harm on the body, that those are harmful as well. And that, of course, is not only about reallocating, but about actually evading that interaction altogether, which can't be done by just moving money around within the police budget. It's not about training police to be better social workers or training police to be better harm reduction, drug overdose responders, but about actually just having appropriate responses to mental health crisis, to drug overdoses, et cetera.
Okay, so why could that, so I don't intend to argue with you, but why could that not be done within the existing police forces? You're saying that it could not be, challenges that the police have could not be alleviated with proper education. Perhaps you could expand on that a bit.
Sure, absolutely. Now, I've spoken with, and I'm beginning to conduct some research on this, with people who have been working since the 1980s. After the police killing of Anthony Griffin in 1987 in Montreal, for example, there was massive community outcry. And what happened afterwards was a promise to train the police better, to have better trainings for the police. So many Black women, Black community organizers at that time took part in police trainings. And of course, throughout the 90s, we continued to see an acceleration of police killings of Black people. After the allegations and systemic evidence came out of policing of Indigenous communities in Montreal, again, the Native Women's Shelter provided trainings for the police and later went to the media decrying the way that they were treated by the police. And of course, we continue to see it as an ongoing issue. All of this suggests, and if we look to evidence based in the United States, that diversity trainings and all of these other forms of trainings, while perhaps well-intentioned, are not actually effective in addressing the realities of racial profiling, of police killings, of gender-based violence, and all the other issues that are at the heart of the problem.
Okay, good. Well, thank you for that. Mr. Bourbonniere, I was following with great interest your conversation with Mr. Harris just a couple of minutes ago, and about, particularly about Indigenous policing and the very good and effective work that you and organizations like yours are doing. So my question to you is similar to my question to Ms. Maynard just a minute ago. Could we, through education and proper training of police within our current policing structures, the RCP, municipal police, provincial police, could we improve policing significantly within the current Canadian context?
You're on mute, Mr. Bourbonniere.
I would love to improve policing in general. Like, let's not do that. Let's improve policing. Let's do a better job at recruiting and training and giving them the skills that they need when they need them. But let's also add community groups that can do the mental health checks, that can do the foot patrols, that can de-escalate situations so that people don't have to have involvement with the police all the time to begin with.
Thank you, Mr. Van Popna. With that, I'll go to Mr. Anand-Sangari. 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to thank both witnesses. Mr. Bourbonniere, I just want to first of all thank you for the work that you do on the ground. I know it's critically important. And as someone who's worked as a youth worker and ran an organization where we helped young people who were in difficulties, I really think it's an area that's so profoundly important across the country. Can you tell me, just based on the 6 organizations that you had outlined, what percentage of the Winnipeg youth population in need or who are involved within the criminal justice system or the child welfare system that you encounter and that you're able to support?
Okay. Well, I wanted to just, for the record, correct the population is 18% of Manitobans identify as Indigenous, not 10%. We have a very strong and proud Indigenous community in Winnipeg. And actually, there's so many Indigenous people doing so well right now. But we also have people that are wounded from generations of effects of the relationship between Canada and its Indigenous peoples. So lots of the folks that we encounter in the community that are struggling, they come from all different backgrounds. The areas that we patrol are in the inner city, are in the north end of Winnipeg, where there is a higher Indigenous population. And as I said, most community members are doing fantastic, doing wonderfully, and are healthy. But some of our folks that are struggling are indeed Indigenous, and it's visual. It's visual. You go into our youth correctional jail, and all the youth are of color or are Indigenous, and all of the staff are white. It's stark. It's striking to actually see that visual. Our child welfare is about 90% Indigenous children in care, and that's just unacceptable.
Mr. Bourbogne, sorry to cut you off, but because with the limitation of time, I want to kind of just hone in on, realizing that there's significant overrepresentation of Indigenous and other racialized people within the system. Let's say you have unlimited resources. What more can you do if you have additional resources to be able to support the young person who's involved with the child welfare system, who is also now directly involved with the criminal justice system? Someone who is having trouble with school, who gets kicked out of school or who's expelled, who may belong to a gang, and who, again, is involved with the criminal justice system. What kind of resources is adequate for you to be able to do the job that you can do, that you have been doing, to be able to address this in a significantly higher way than you're able to do now with the limited resources you have?
Okay, if you want to look at the really big picture, we have to look at the root causes of inequity. We have to look at poverty. We have to look at privilege. Right now, I believe there are 3 things Indigenous youth need. They need education, and not for the inherent wisdom of Western education, but for the credentialism. We need Indigenous young people to participate in a good way in the Canadian economy. We also need Indigenous youth and all people to understand the history and to understand what went on to get to where we've gotten to today. And then we need to backfill that hurt and that anger with support and nurturance and resources and elders and ceremony. That is what Indigenous youth need.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Zachary. You have a few seconds, but because you're from Scarborough, I'm cutting you off.
Thank you.
2.5 minutes, Madame Michaud, and if the clerk could indicate to me who the next Conservative questioner will be. Thank you. Madame Michaud, 2.5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is for Ms. Menard. Thank you, Ms. Menard, for your work. I've looked into your work in your book. Your book talks about racial profiling, poverty, and racism. You talked about historical facts linked to slavery and colonialism that still affect Black communities today. Therefore, according to you, Ms. Menard, what should the federal government do, and what is its role so that we really address those issues and we make progress so that Black communities are better treated?
to highlight the way that slavery, in particular, Canada's history of slavery, which is so often erased, is so much a part of the ongoing surveillance of Black communities across multiple systems. So I think, of course, it's really important, as I'd addressed, the criminalization of drugs, the criminalization of sex work, for example, the criminalization of poverty through an assortment of bylaws that are taking place is something that is absolutely crucial. Of course, ending the mass impoverishment of Black communities is something that has always been integral to Black people's well-being in this society, but we also need to look at the ways in which federal immigration policies have impacted Black communities. So if we're thinking, for example, of the way that largely Black and also Central American workers are in this moment currently in horrifying conditions, the ones that are picking the fruits and vegetables for this country throughout the entire summer, most exposed to COVID, for example, as well as the many Black undocumented work people and asylum seekers who are currently facing possible deportation, including those who have worked as frontline workers in Quebec. This is also something that federal law substantively increases. If we look to the way that Canada Border Services Agency is been increasingly working with police services in Montreal, in Toronto especially, which means that when people are being racially profiled, that also comes, any police stop, whether it's driving while Black or carding, can also lead to detention, to deportation, given that, of course, Canada's Black population, over half of Canada's Black population was born elsewhere. So those are only a few really important legislative changes that could take place.
Thank you, Madame Michaud. 2.5 minutes, Mr. Harris.
Thank you, Chair. And Ms. Menard, I'd like to ask you about your views to elaborate somewhat on the body cam question. We've had some positive comments on it by the Prime Minister, by the Minister of Public Safety. There's a RCMP are doing a pilot project in Nunavut. You have indicated that research shows that it's not effective, but this is proposed as some part of a solution to the use of force question in Canada with dealing with the racialized or Indigenous populations, Black population. What can you talk about the case against that as a solution, please, and a little bit more elaborately?
Absolutely. So the study that I was highlighting was in a Yale Law Review that was published in 2018. That was the most systematic study that looked at every study of body cameras that had been accomplished so far. And it found that it did not reduce, again, police killings of Black communities. It did not significantly impact use of force. Another study actually suggested that police feel confident in the kind of violence that they regularly take part in, so see no harm in it. Other studies have highlighted the fact that police will often turn the cameras off for incidents of violence or that footage goes missing. So what we need to remember is that pushing for reforms that are extremely expensive, if we look to the significant public costs that are required to implement body cameras for something that is at best ineffective, is something that we can just simply not rely on in a context where in this year, for example, we've already had double the police killings by July that we had by that time last year. So we are in a crisis point, and throwing significant amounts of money into reforms that are not effective is fundamentally just it's not the appropriate solution. It's just a matter of kicking the can forward and not acting on the really immediate changes that we need to see.
And this research that you're referencing, I know you mentioned Yale, but is this primarily American data, and is it broader than that? And are you convinced that the conclusions that are reached are applicable to a situation in Canada as well?
It's
Very
primarily,
briefly, please.
It is American data, and I'm absolutely convinced because of just how systemic of a study it is. It's the most informative to date. And I think that if we're going to make policy changes informed by research, then we simply must look at the research, and the research has been quite clear that this is not a solution to systemic racism.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. Mr. Motts, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. Mr. Berbernere, I have two questions for you that I want to focus on. First of all, I want to thank you for what you do. The work that you do has always intrigued me, and those of groups like yours across the country. In all my years of policing, it's something that I've always supported. So with your background in frontline service to the community, I'm sure that you have many success stories of people who, from marginalized communities, who have embraced the opportunities that they were provided with and have turned their life around. You told us one during your opening remarks, and thank you for that. In all those circumstances, in your experience, are there any common themes or experiences or opportunities that you can explain to the committee that are consistent and necessary to the success of the individuals that you're trying to reach on the street?
Yes, thank you for the opportunity to answer that. Mentorship, wraparound support, just, young people come to us, from street life, from prison, from gangs, and they've been used and abused in those settings, and they're tired. But they don't feel encouraged that they can make it in a system that they feel has always looked down on them. So just to have people with lived experience wrap around them and support them and believe in them until they can believe that in themselves is what's been working. We call it lateral empathy. Lateral empathy and lateral kindness is the opposite of lateral violence. Lateral violence is a phenomena that occurs when an oppressed group will sometimes turn on one another, and we're changing that narrative where it's the people that are helping one another. There's no panacea. There's no government or church or treatment center that's going to rescue anyone. It's the community that will look after each other, and out of that, we've had incredible success stories.
Thank you very much for those comments. Because you're from Winnipeg and you walk the streets of Winnipeg, this will be, you've seen this. This is something that surprised me a few years back when I, actually about 18 months ago when I was there. But we know that the mental health crisis that we're facing in this country, we know the police interactions are in those mental health crises are increasing as well. And it's been a challenge for policing for decades, quite frankly, responding to mental health type calls. Today, with our massive increased levels of illegal drug use and higher rates of addiction, there are more and more requests for help. And usually the police are in many circumstances, the only ones that do and can respond. The police have some training, but that's not really what their role and expertise is. I can tell you that my time in Winnipeg, short, working with the police there and listening to them, there are many times they have hundreds of high-risk calls backed up because all of their cars, dozens of cars, their first-line responding, sir, are tied up with individuals who are experiencing a mental health crisis and need assistance, and they can't leave them at the health facility where they are taking them to. And so all of their cars are tied up. And you see this firsthand every single day. And quite frankly, with the meth issues that you're experiencing there in Winnipeg, I've never seen a community that has as much mental health, drug addiction, and crime, combination. So in your experience, sir, can you kind of help me understand what you think is going to work better? You talk about communities helping each other and people in community helping people in community, but we all got to work together. And from your experience, how do we properly deal with some of the mental health challenges that you're experiencing in Winnipeg and across this country for law enforcement
Mr.
response?
Bournier,
Sorry.
Mr. Mott, you've left him about 30 seconds.
Well, I'll keep quiet then.
Very important question. So,
okay. We need to invite the police to step down at the front end and at the back end of that whole process. Unofficially and informally, we receive calls from the community to do wellness checks that the police never even know about. Myself and the people who I work with will knock on any door in any neighborhood in Winnipeg, and we have. That's the front end. I think we're okay to take care of the front end. If we need police, we'll call. The back end is having police tied up in the hospitals, in the emergency rooms, and I think that could be better served by mental health workers doing that role as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bournier. That is a very succinct answer to a difficult question. Mr. Lightbound, final 5 minutes, please. I'm not hearing you, Joel. You don't appear to be on mute, but I'm not hearing you. Want to try again? There we hear you now. Okay, parfait.
Okay, perfect. Fantastic. So, Ms. Menard, Mr. Boulbonnière, thank you for your testimony and your participation in our work. My question is for Ms. Menard. First of all, given all the work you've done on this topic, what are the greatest deficiencies in data that is accessible on race to identify systemic racism in our police forces? And my second question is, this week, 2 days ago, we saw the city of Repentigny, Quebec, and its police service, and 3 officers were condemned by the Human Rights Tribunal to pay $35,000 to a black teacher who was the victim of racial profiling by the police in Repentigny. $35,000. A week ago, Longueuil, Quebec, was fined $10,000. 2 of its officers were involved. What's your conception of these human rights tribunals that are sometimes hard to access, but could be used as a mechanism for creating accountability?
I believe I'm hoping that I understand your first question correctly in asking what are the biggest barriers in terms of addressing racial profiling in policing. Is that correct?
And more particularly, the data.
The data, okay. Thank you. Yes, I'm happy to answer that. I mean, something that I think is just sort of ridiculous in a Canadian context where we are so rarely offered the ability to just have what should be publicly accessible data when it comes to race-based incidents, right? So, for example, we often have to rely on access to informations or special reports, for example, those that have been done by the Toronto Star, or until very recently in Montreal, a report was published. Up until then, one of the only statistics that we had was accidentally leaked to the press by the police, but was actually not supposed to be published. So of course we have an ongoing secrecy that makes it much more difficult. Although I would argue as well that having access to data still does not stand in for change. In the United States, for example, you have publicly accessible data, but if you don't do something to actually address the racism, you're just documenting it better. So I would highlight both that it's important and that it's also not enough. As to the second strategy about the way that human rights offices work, I do think that these are one important place where people are able to, in some instances, get justice. But of course, if we look to the Quebec Human Rights Commission, we know that people are waiting years and years and years to get access to this trial, and it is quite narrow in terms of who really has access to this. So as far as oversight goes, much as these organizations do important work, is vastly not enough for the amount of people who are regularly experiencing police harassment and police violence. Like if we look to one study that came out in Montreal in 2008, we saw that over 40% of Black youth in just one neighborhood had been stopped by the police that year. So if we look to this as the vastly expansive kind of harm that it is across our society that's happening so regularly, human rights organizations do important work and are not given enough of the power or funding to really intervene. And anyways, it doesn't do any, it only provides a kind of compensation afterwards for an injustice that never should have occurred in the first place. So again, it doesn't get to the heart of preventing police killings, police violence, etc.
Minute and a half.
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président. Moi, ça fait le tour.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Those are all the questions I had. Thank you.
Colleagues, thank you, witnesses, for your help to the chair in managing the clock. We are almost 40 minutes past where we should be, but thank you regardless. And with that, we'll again, on behalf of the committee, I want to say to both Ms. Maynard and Mr. Bourmenier, you've contributed mightily to this study and provided us with some very thoughtful comments for which I'm quite grateful. So with that, colleagues, I'll bring the meeting, I'll adjourn the meeting, but I will reach out to those on the subcommittee to talk about how we manage our time going forward. Again, thank you. Sorry.
Could I have 10 seconds?
10 seconds is yours. Absolutely.
Okay. I just want to thank Ms. Maynard. It's been an honor to share the platform with her. and I learned so much from her. And I think we need to listen to the research. We need to, just like COVID, we need to listen to the science. So thank you very much. And thank you for all of you for what you do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Meeting adjourned. Thank you.